Oh, for the love. Sorry, just clearing my Mountain Dew hole.
I got my phone hole cleaned today.
That's where you keep it? You're so cerebral and you're so developed and evolved.
From the middle after dark over here.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 56 from the middle. Yes, they're middle-class guys living in the middle of America, in the middle chapters of their lives, with a point of view that is somewhere in the middle.
Ladies and gentlemen, the dulcet tones you've just heard are coming from the voice of my friend, Kent Justice. Thank you for joining us tonight, Kent, and being our guest for episode number 56. Folks, let me tell you a little bit about him before we dive into the conversation. Kent co-anchors News for Jax in Jacksonville, Florida, newscasts on weeknights. He reports on government and politics. He also hosts This Week in Jacksonville. That's Channel 4's Hot Topics and Politics Public Affairs show each Sunday morning. Political reporter as well. You've covered inaugurations, national political party conventions, and local races for government office and everything in between. Seasoned debate moderator. You've worked alongside Jake Tapper for CNN in a nationwide televised debate between Florida governors Rick Scott and Charlie Crist in 2014. You've got numerous community causes and organizations that you are supporting, a volunteer for, on the board of directors for, still doing a little bit with Justice Communications, which is your consulting gig. And when I met you, you were the anchor and reporter for ABC 6 and Fox 28 here in Columbus, Ohio. So very busy guy, very qualified guy, super excited to have him.
And then there's us.
And then there's us.
Hey, I'm right there with you. I want to be part of us. You know, and talk about in the middle. I mean, Columbus, Ohio is like, it's the definition of the middle. And I started working there in 1999 and was there almost a dozen years. So got a chance to really enjoy being in Central Ohio and all that kind of Midwest living has to provide. Raised kids until they were 9th grade, 7th grade, 5th grade. I mean, it was a great place to be. Lots of affection for specifically you guys and for the lots of friends that I have back there.
Well, again, we're so glad and grateful that you could join us. It's kind of crazy how it all worked out. I just reached out to you to say, would you ever consider being a guest? And that was like a day before we're recording tonight, and you happen to be free and on vacation, so kind of perfect timing.
Yeah, it was perfect timing. You're exactly right. Because in all honesty, I was off the week before. I'm off this week. We had travel plans. We were going to be in Europe. Oh, that wasn't happening because of 2020. You name it, COVID, whatever. So I was a little salty. I was a little bitter about the whole thing. Hey, 2 weeks off from work is hard to do in the TV industry. And instead, I was able to find something productive, like hanging out with you guys for a little while.
Well, if you consider that productive, we will take it.
Something more fun than just sitting on my bum on the couch watching Netflix. That's how I define that, I guess.
Depends on what's in your queue, but.
So, Kent, you and I first met on worship team at our church in Gahanna, Ohio, where we were going at the time. New Life there in Gahanna.
Do you remember what year that was?
Gosh, this is
a while ago.
Yeah. Became fast friends. So you and Kendall have a little bit in common as far as like leading worship. Then you and I did some business together. We did the Amway thing together for a few years.
Yeah.
And then you headed down to Florida. We've talked a lot on this podcast about how much we love Florida.
There's big love.
Florida.
Yeah.
No place I'd rather be.
That's a joke for our regular listeners, where Kendall doesn't really like anything south of like North Carolina.
That's not true. The weather's beautiful.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful. Sweating is my favorite thing to do.
Well, we've got January for you. About it. That'd be about it. But I'll tell you, after living all that time in Central Ohio and then moving down here, it was beginning of October in 2010 when we moved down here. And I remember getting here and they're like, oh, it's the fall and these are the great days of the year. And it was like 84 degrees. And I'm like, holy cow, I'm sweating over here. What's going on here? And one of the first weekends that I anchored the news, our weathercaster came out and said, yeah, you guys need to be prepared. You'll probably want a light jacket tonight, a little windbreaker or something, because it's going to get down to 72 degrees. Okay, it's a different world I'm in here in Florida than living in Ohio. But it's great, and you get accustomed to things. I enjoy the heat now, which I never thought I would. But you'll be inside working, and they've got the air conditioner at 74, and it feels like you're freezing. And then you go outside, and it's 98, and you go, that's better. It's crazy.
And you're saying you get used to that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you've been early in your career, you were on the West Coast, right? You started sort of in sports broadcasting, and then spent some time in Montana, right? So you've been all over
there. I'll jump in there, Corey. I'm really, really fortunate. Grew up in the San Francisco area, but really fortunate kind of early on to kind of figure out, here's what I really want to do. So as a freshman in high school, tallest kid on the basketball team, and my starting position was my finishing position, which was the far end of the bench. So it didn't take me too long to realize, Kent, you're probably not going to be a professional athlete. You love sports. What can you do to stay involved? And so by the time my sophomore year in high school came around, I was writing for the school newspaper. The advisor I had said, Kent, why just write about it? Why not talk about it? And so by my junior and senior year, I was doing the public address announcing for sporting events at our high school, basketball. There was a teacher who really liked football, so I never got to do that. He wasn't giving up that gig. Baseball. If there was a game going on, I usually had a chance to be the public address announcer. And then starting that senior year in high school, there was a gentleman in our church who worked in radio in San Francisco. And it was an easy listening format that this man was doing. But hey, that's a big market, 5th largest market in the country, and he's on the radio. So I went to him and said, hey, Mr. Boone, give me some guidance here. Next year, I'm going to go to college. I really want to be a sportscaster. What do I do to prepare for that? And he gave me just fantastic advice. Kent, when you go to school, you're going to be one of a lot of people who says, hey, I want a chance to do that. I want to be able to call the game on radio or even on TV. He said, you want to be the one who shows up and says, hey, I'd like a chance. And I've done that before. So this is Kent Justice, mid-1980s at the public address announcer's desk at the basketball game. And I've got notes that I'm taking for the game, for writing for the paper. And I've got the microphone there in front of me to do a public address. And I've got a little handheld cassette recorder that I'm doing play-by-play. Here's Hubble coming down the left side. Dish into Dylan. He kicks it back out. Kendall for 3. Kendall, 3. Notes. And it was just this circus going on at the scorer's table. And one of the newspaper writers for a big San Francisco area newspaper chain noticed this. He's like, kid, what are you doing? So when I explained it, he said, well, listen, the high school basketball games are Wednesdays and Fridays. How about Tuesdays and Thursdays? Come work for us and take, badminton scores over the phone or whatever. It was a $4 an hour job, a couple nights a week, but I was working as a 17-year-old at a Bay Area newspaper chain. And it was just a really cool experience. And, talk about paying your dues. I had to learn how to type the little agate font, the smallest font you could find in a newspaper back in those days. I had to make sure that I was making the right phone calls and getting the right info. But it gave me a chance to write a couple of feature articles. And when the sports editor changed and I'm 18, I'm about to go away to college, there was a position that opened up and the sports editor said, okay, how about you? You want a full-time job as a sports journalist? And, it paid all of like $7 an hour or something, really outstanding like that. But at that point I said, wow, could be a dream job, but I could be giving up going and getting an education. So maybe I should do that instead. So I went off to college, and it was a great decision, but that early experience gave me enough of the flavor of covering sports, doing something I was passionate about and loved covering, that it sent me on my way to kind of pursue my dream.
That's so cool. Like how those early sort of moments shaped you, and it's never a straight line, right?
Yeah.
To your career path in life, but the things that you got to see and experience. I always talk about like the bumpers in bowling, right? Like they kind of kept you into that trajectory. And then you shared something with me really cool once, where you said you were following the sports broadcasting path, but then you discovered that for you were more interested in the story behind the sports.
Yeah.
And so
so before we get there, Corey, Kendall, did you like being the guy who hit the 3-point shot?
Yeah, no, I enjoyed being able to be the hero in your story.
You drained it, man. You drilled
I know.
it.
Yeah.
beautiful. I kind of felt like we were there. So good, you guys.
We were there.
So the college experience was tremendous in that it gave me a lot of opportunity. I went to a smaller school, so Pepperdine University, Southern California, 2,800 undergraduates, but there weren't as many people there trying to be the sportscaster on campus as at UCLA or at Ohio State or, one of the bigger schools. So lots of practical experience. And when I got out and had my chance to try and get a first job, kind of goes back to the newspaper experience. My first job out of college really was writing for the LA Daily News. The newspaper doesn't even exist anymore, but it was the stereotype of entry-level journalism. I worked at the city desk, and I would go to the local police substations and write down with a little pad of paper any of the major crimes, any thefts or property loss that was more than $5,000, this kind of thing. I would do a Mr. Traffic column. It's a big deal in LA. People would write in and say, hey, we need a stoplight over here. Or, hey, there's not enough lanes on this road. And I'd research it and I'd write about it. I'd go down to the DMV and take photos of people to add their comments, because there'd be a soapbox of the day kind of question. Hey, what do you think about name the thing? And then you get 8 people to give you a man on the street interview. I also got to write obituaries. So, that is the stereotype of entry-level journalism job. I was all excited because in 1990, the man who had created the claymation of the first King Kong movie had passed away. We're in an LA area, so, I don't recall the gentleman's name. God bless. Anyway, I don't remember his name, but I was so excited about writing about this that I had this great lead, and he toppled skyscrapers, and it was incredible. And this man made the claymation that was so important to this movie back in the 1930s. My editor looked at it, looked at me, looked back at the screen, pressed delete a whole bunch of times, and wrote Joe Blow, 78, died. That was, I'm like, it's going to be my coming up. I was going to write this, and everyone would know. But getting started in sportscasting, I got an opportunity in Great Falls, Montana. Now, among the television markets, there are about 215 television markets. The first is the largest, New York City. The second is LA. And you kind of go down largest to smallest. Well, the smallest television market in the country at that point was Glendive, Montana. I think there are like 40,000 people there. I got a job in Great Falls, Montana. And I got the phone call from the news director who says, Kent, my name is Dick Pompa. I'm at KFBB TV in Great Falls, Montana. I saw your tape. I want you to be my sportscaster. And I said, that sounds great. I'll take it. And I had to get a big road atlas out and flip the pages and go, where is Great Falls, Montana? And it kind of got the ball rolling, so to speak. Small market TV is where you go and you make a ton of mistakes. and you don't get fired for them, which is a really good thing for your career. Because later on in your career, you'll get fired for things you had no control over. So, it was really good to go and be a young guy and make mistakes. And about 6 years into my career, we had moved. I'd gotten married at that point. My wife and I, in our first 6 years of marriage, had moved 6 times. She's like, what is going on? I'm in Santa Maria, California. So that's in between LA and San Francisco on the coast. It's near Pismo Beach, which Bugs Bunny would tell you is a great place. I got an opportunity to go into news instead of doing sports. And at the time, the conversation I was having with myself, hey, there's a better career path. There are fewer guys fighting to be that news anchor than there are fighting to be the weekend third place sportscaster out there. And I wasn't a former professional athlete and didn't have a shtick. And anyway, it just was like, what are my prospects there? And really, Kent, what do you enjoy about sportscasting anyway? I love the stories of sports. I love baseball is a favorite sport. Why? Because it's got all the action? No, at times it has some action, but there are stories that come out of that. And I figured out, you know what, Kent, you can tell stories that make more of an impact in life than touchdowns, tackles, turnovers, or hits, runs, and errors. So I made that move into doing news and really have enjoyed what that's meant. And by the way, I still love sports. I can watch sports in a different way than I could when I had to cover the sports. I'm like so many people across America and probably across the globe who are saying, bring back the sports. When will the sports? I'm tired of ESPN Classic and all of that business. So that was where that transition kind of happened.
And an important one too. I mean, for you to sort of land on like, what is it about this that I truly love? And then to be able to make that pivot. That's really cool. I'm hyper aware that I've done most of the talking, and I know that my co-hosts
Me too. You should pipe down, man.
my co-hosts are as excited to hang out with you as I am. And before we wrap up, by the way, are we wrapping
up already?
No. No, I'm just letting you know ahead of time. So our loyal listeners, we fondly refer to as middlers. And we asked a few of them if they could ask a news anchor any questions, what would they be? So before we hang up with you tonight,
that's awesome.
We're going to do some rapid fire questions from our listeners. But guys, you go ahead. Kent's all yours.
Let's start with kind of basic. One things that I like is hearing about people's lives, their profession, not just the career, but sort of what is it like? You know, there's a handful of podcasts out there that are really good at this. Everything from news anchors.
Is this one of them?
Doctors.
No.
To janitors. Like, everybody's life is affected by their career somehow. Their day looks a little different. Let's talk about yours. So what's a day in the life of Kent Justice look like?
So I think I've got in some ways a very typical explanation of what a day in the life looks like for a television news journalist.
Yeah.
But I've also got a little bit different. I don't know. Just my personality. I want to be going. I want to be doing things. And I would not describe myself as type A, but I guess in some ways I'm an achiever. I want to accomplish things. I want to do a variety of things. For instance, when I talked about going to college, I went on a music scholarship. I played trumpet. That's how I paid my way through school so I could be a sportscaster or a TV journalist. And loved every second of it because it was different. But for me, right now, at age 52, in the year 2020, please, let's get on to 2021 very soon. But anyway, in 2020, my daily schedule involves getting up roughly 8 o'clock. I go into the TV station at 2:30 in the afternoon. And that's called a night side shift. I go from 2:30 until the end of the 11 o'clock news, which is 11:32 p.m., 11:33 on some nights. Anyway, it's basically kind of a 2:30 until midnight shift. During that 2:30 to midnight shift, Sometimes I'll have a story that I do in the 5 or the 6 o'clock news. And so right when I get in, I've got to organize that. Hey, what's the story assignment? Hey, yeah, I'll make some phone calls. I'll try and do an interview, or I'll pull together some of the elements that are already there, because in the morning they interviewed the mayor, and at noon we got to talk to the congressman. And so Kent put those together so that makes sense on the topic of the day. So I might do that for the 5 or 6. And then before we get to say 9 o'clock in the evening, I'll be working on stories. I'll be working on setting up guests for my Sunday morning politics show. We tape that during the week. So earlier in the week, I'll be trying to line up guests. Hey, what's the relevant topic this week? That's why it's called This Week in Jacksonville. And by 9 o'clock, I really have to kind of put everything else aside and say, okay, I've got to focus on the scripts that I'm going to be reading in the 10 and the 11 o'clock news. So for that 92 minutes or so, I'm a co-anchor with one person in the 10 o'clock news and a different person in the 11 o'clock news. And the way that works is a producer typically writes the scripts, or a reporter out in the field will write the script for the anchor to say before they toss to the reporter live in their package. Sometimes it'll be, hey, Kent, I need you to write 3 scripts. And so I go research that and get the sources and put it together. So it's all, whether the producer wrote it or whether I wrote it or whether that reporter sent it in from the field, so it sounds like me. Mm-hmm. That's a big component of the job there, because it's not authentic if I just read some words that somebody else wrote. And you as a listener, you as a watcher, a viewer, you'll know if it's authentic or not. Now, can I go write every single one of those stories that's going to be coming on the air between 10 p.m. and 11:32? No, but I have to know enough about them to know how to deliver that. Mm-hmm. That's part of the day there. So that's my work day from Channel 4. Here's the other thing. I mentioned that you can, make a lot of mistakes in a small market and not get fired. It's also a very subjective industry. It's a contract industry. So you work, hey, I've got a contract to do this job at this TV station for 3 years, or 4 years if you're lucky. Or thank you, God, I've got a 5-year contract. That's golden in the TV world. But at the end of those contracts, very often there are the conversations that sound a little bit like this. Kendall, you're my main anchor, all right? Hey, Kendall, come on in. Yeah, I see you've got about 2 weeks left on your contract. You're a nice guy, but you know. So we're not renewing your contract. And then Kendall would say, well, why not? I work hard. I think I'm an answer, not a problem. I'm a solution. And then the news director or whoever is letting you go says, well, you're a nice guy, but we're not renewing your contract. I mean, that's how the conversation kind of goes. So I've had a conversation 3 times in my 30-year television career. It's unpleasant. It's not very good. And before moving here to Jacksonville, which was the greatest thing that has happened in my professional life, there was about 14 months of trying to get back on your feet after having one of those conversations there in Columbus. Hey, Kent, you're a nice guy, but. So part of my everyday work life, Kendall, is a second career. I do financial planning and management, investment management. I work with families to try and make sure that they are on the path to achieving their financial goals. Now, you heard me talk earlier about I like to be involved in different things. Mm-hmm. Know how often there's a financial planner / TV news anchor. But it works for me. And part of that is because of the heartache of 10 years ago of going through 14 months without any income, right at the end of the Great Recession, not being able to keep our house there in Hilliard, Ohio, not being able to consistently put food on the table for a family of 5, not being able to fill in the blanks. It was rotten. And so I'm doing something for the family to try and make sure that and I don't think there will be, I've got a great relationship at my current TV station, incredible company to work for, great management. But if there's ever another conversation, hey, Kent, come on in. We see you're about 2 weeks out from your contract being up, and
You're a nice guy.
yeah. Famous last words. You're a nice guy. Oh boy. Anyway, so my mornings will consist of going into another office and doing work, or working from home, working for clients, trying to help make sure that they're taking the right steps to achieve their dreams like, hey, I want to be able to retire someday. And so those are the Monday through Fridays. The weekends often involve some of the news covering too, because news events happen all the time. And what I've done, especially over the 10 years being here in Jacksonville, is try to develop lots of relationships, lots of contacts, so that when something's happening in the city of St. Augustine where I live, someone will reach out to me and say, hey, Ken, I don't know if you know about this, but I think your station should cover this thing. Here's my phone number. Here's the person to contact. So even if you're on the weekend, or even if it's in the morning, you want to make sure that you're getting that into the newsroom so they can make decisions on, hey, is this something we want to cover today or not? Kendall, that was my entire 20-minute limit. Sorry about that. I got a little long.
No, you're fine. I actually have a friend of mine who's a history and government teacher. I was talking to him a little bit today about having you on, and he had told me that he's kind of wondered where the TV news anchor position sits now relative to where it used to be when it comes to control over the broadcast. And you certainly touched on that, and mentioning that, you know, there's a team effort that has to come into play with even choosing what you're going to talk about, much less what it is you're going to say about it, because there's too much on a daily basis for any one person to synthesize all those things. But kind of more specifically, he had mentioned, you know, radio disc jockeys have kind of gone the way of computer algorithms telling them what songs to play.
Right.
And you're getting less of their personality. Do you feel like there's been movement that direction at all in the profession?
Kendall, I appreciate it. I think I know a bit of what you're getting at there. I've seen a change. So who are the famous, memorable news anchors you know from Columbus? So some of my former colleagues there are probably still working. Colleen Marshall or Cabot Ray, who retired a few years ago at Channel.
Another worship leader.
How about that? Yeah. I've got funny stories about Cabot Ray and singing, so maybe not podcast. But it used to be the news anchor would do that early newscast at 5 or 6, and they'd do the late one at 11 o'clock or 10, and they'd have lots of editorial control. They'd have almost a managing editor kind of role. Hey, I'm looking at this script, and I don't think we should do that. The way things have transitioned in these last few years is, for news anchors, it's important to show that you're out in the community, and especially when you've got experience, like a guy who's got 30 years like that, to be at the big event, because that's, hey, you're taking your credibility that people usually see on set and you're putting them out in the story to gather that information. So that means you're out of the office or out of the mix for trying to help people, producers, writers, associate producers, figure out the right parts of the story, or which stories are more important than others. And so it's still a demand on the local TV station's news anchor to be involved in that managing editor kind of role. But it's hard when, hey, I don't get to the scripts until 9 o'clock and the show starts at 10. Or, hey, I'm working on my story that I was out getting interviews on until 8:30. And so now I got to put it together. And so now I don't even get to look at the scripts for 10 o'clock until 9:30. And then, you know, chaos that always happens with breaking news and all your best laid plans. Oh, we got to, throw it all the wayside. But certainly there's an element and a really important role, I think, for news anchors at the stations that you watch there in Central Ohio, or our station, other stations, for people with more experience to be leaders on that issue. The things that come up for me would be a younger writer or producer writing a story and being in a hurry and leaving out some essential information or leaving out a few words. For instance, if you're talking about Bob Smith was arrested last night and he was accused of backing his car into his ex-girlfriend's garage and then driving away. Well, if you write that so that it explains, hey, this is what they accuse him of, rather than writing it as, hey, he did this and locked him up, one is more accurate than the other.
Right.
One is much more important to say, hey, here's what police say happened, but you've got to preserve that guy's right to defend himself or to be innocent until proven guilty. Even tough to do when there's surveillance video. Hey, so here's the video that we're seeing, and this car backs into this garage. Police are saying Bob Smith is the guy who was driving that car. Bob Smith's going to be in court tomorrow. You've got to attribute, you've got to make sure that you're telling both sides. I mean, that's just one example of things that come up, and the experienced people in the room need to be able to say, hey, wait a second, let's make sure we do this. Hey, here's a subtle one. When you're reading a story and you're talking about Bob Smith, the next time I talk about him, I'm going to say, Smith told police such and such. That's different then. That connotes something different to you as a listener than if I say, Bob told police this. Mm-hmm. If I start using first name, now I'm telling you, hey, it's like my buddy Bob. I'm on Bob's side. No, there's no place for that. That's not my role as a news journalist, a news anchor or a journalist. My role is to, cut some of that stuff out and give you the facts rather than opinions or shaded view. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah.
Around 5-10 years ago, Kent, news stations started making a really strong push for like what I will call crowdsourcing the news, right? Where you could get our app, and if something happens in your neighborhood, text us, send a video, live stream, whatever. How much did that change the industry? Or was that like that was a good idea, we tried it and it's not really working? Or you still got to run it through the funnel of, fact checking and credibility and chasing down the story?
Yeah. You do, but I'll tell you the big benefit for us is it does give you more opportunity to catch the news when it's happening, to hear from people about things that concern them. And absolutely, Corey, you get at something that's important there. You definitely still, wherever the source is, wherever it comes from, you still want to put it through the meat grinder, so to speak. You want to put it through several layers of, let's verify this. Let's find out if that's really true. Let's get the other side, all of those sorts of things, so that you're not, because that's caused people, news organizations, problems when they say, oh, we just want to be the first on with this. So we saw that on Twitter, bing, we're going to retweet or grab it as our own and put a push alert out. You really can't do that and not have your reputation suffer at some point.
Yeah. So it gives you more eyes in the sky, if you will, but you still got to run it through due diligence.
I want to change the topic a little bit here. Dylan, I want to know how you feel here, because it seems to me that you're the only guy who doesn't have a little facial hair.
Yeah,
like a week and it's terrible, but you're clean shaven.
Yeah, this is the whole quarantine's worth of growth, and I got nothing. So 3-4 months, nothing on there. It's not the worst problem I have in my life. So but as somebody on the logo needed to not have a beard, it was just going to be too stereotypical. If somebody on there didn't have the smart glasses and the clean shaved.
Well, and so if the guys on the end have the beards, you can be truly in the middle.
I don't want to say unique,
strategic.
Whatever, but yeah, sure. Well, really, I have ingrained in me that people trust salesmen that are clean shaven, and since I work in sales and do video calls, I try to keep it clean shaven. The real answer is I couldn't grow a beard if I tried. So.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the summer I turned 21, I did a study abroad program. And I thought, hey, I'm going to be gone for 3 months. I'm going to grow it out. I'm going to see what happens here. And I couldn't grow a mustache for anything. So it was kind of an Amish look, kind of the Abe Lincoln, which did not attract many lovely females there in the great European nation. So
you mean they don't look for our Amish populations? as their Hollywood starlets and their stars that they aspire.
They weren't at that time, perhaps.
Oh, okay. Just a trend thing, I'm sure. Yeah,
Maybe.
just a trend thing. Yeah, so that's where I am. I wear a hat, no beard, glasses. Just try to keep it smart.
Dylan, I miss talking to you. I want to make sure I got you involved in the conversation.
Thank
man.
you. I have plenty of questions that you won't want to probably answer, but we'll save those. We'll save those. Kendall had a great question, so I wanted to let him go.
Did I?
I think so. I think a lot of people like the day in the life stuff. And Corey mentioned we had some questions.
Oh no, I thought you were talking about something else. Never mind.
Oh,
Sorry.
no. Yeah. And Corey mentioned we had some questions. I have a couple Twitter questions to add too from.
Oh,
from
I didn't know
fans
you
that
reached out to the
yeah.
Twitterverse.
Of course. Yeah. I asked on Twitter too. So I have a couple more that we can throw in.
Awesome.
You know that one of the most common questions that news anchors get from kids who come in, and we're not doing this during coronavirus land, but used to have classrooms come and see the news, you know, or you'd go as a news anchor or reporter, you'd go to a classroom and you do questions and answers. Like first grade and kindergarten, you know what their most popular question was? Do you go to the bathroom right there? How do you go to the bathroom?
All right. So Corey,
Well,
we're going
I do leave the studio for that.
Yeah, take that one off the list.
Yeah, that was my hard question. Okay. Let's just
Actually, I
rid
have
of
questions that kind of feel like that. Like it, you know, watching those folks on the news. You know, I wonder things about them. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
But
Yeah, and the boxer briefs under the table. Like, are
Yeah,
you wearing
can't do that
athletic
anymore.
shorts? And that's got to be another one.
that was an actual Facebook question. Yeah, what's the pants and shoes situation?
So you'll notice this when you watch next time, but whether you're looking at Sports Center or the local news or the national news or whatever, lots of try to showcase your set. And so the new sets have monitor walls and they've got curves and they got different. So you're up and walking around a lot. Anybody who comes to work in the TV news business these days and says, I'm going to wear my shorts underneath the desk, you're going to get caught. Nobody does that anymore, although, yes, back in the day. Yeah, when I was a weekend sportscaster, as a weekend sportscaster in a smaller market, you'd run around with the camera and you'd get the video and you'd edit it together. And so you usually would wear shorts, and you know, I'm wearing a logo polo shirt for my TV station tonight. Well, that would be your dress. You'd run into the station, try to put your stuff together, and you weren't going to get up from the desk. So yeah, why not? I'll put on the dress shirt and the tie and the sports coat, and you got flip flops and some khaki shorts underneath the desk. Not anymore.
Hair and makeup. Do you do your own hair and makeup, or do you sit down at hair and makeup before you go on? How does that work?
Is there fashion advice or anything like that? Or do you dress yourself?
These are incredible questions.
So
I
not
do
much-
dress myself.
Hey, listen.
My mother is so proud of me. I do dress myself.
Our questions aren't that much better than the kindergartners in first grade.
That's what we're telling you.
You guys are taking all my best ones that I had written down. I got
I
nothing.
tell you, the least favorite part of the job is putting on makeup myself. Oh, I hate that. But part of the job. In terms of your wardrobe, we do have a wardrobe consultant who says, hey, can't try to wear this combination, but don't wear that one. And if you can shed some ego and rely on somebody who's, they're an expert, it works out okay. You look good.
I did have a question for you, a quick one we can throw in now. So is there a TV show or movie about what you do that you think is a really accurate depiction? And follow up, why is it Anchorman?
I went to see Anchorman when it came out. We were still living in Columbus, and kind of went on a double date. My wife and I took a friend and her date. I couldn't sit through the whole thing. It was halfway through. I'm like, we're out of here. It's just completely insulting when you're in the industry. You're like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I've watched it since then, and I thought, I used to like that actor, and now I can't stand it. It's quite the parody, isn't it?
It's a very nice way to say it.
Yes.
This is kind of related.
You just wanted to see if I would say good night, San Diego, or something like that, right?
Well, there's a lot of, as I'm sure you've at least seen the title on YouTube. There's a lot of like the anchor fail videos that are kind of that
Why
can,
would I watch those? What are you
well,
talking about?
right.
Why
So
would I see any of those ever?
right. So
I might be on one. I don't want to watch those.
medical people don't want to go home and watch, a medical show. But the thing about a lot of those videos, you can clearly tell most of these people are professionals and doing an excellent job. And then like a bird flies through the thing. And so you laugh at it, but it's not that you're laughing at the person. It's just the situation. But is that the kind of thing that like you guys are sending links to each other of some of these videos going, okay, this one's pretty good though?
I've got one of those earlier in my career jobs was in Rapid City, South Dakota, which is not far from Mount Rushmore, a source of controversy these days. The guy that I worked with there has turned out to be like a lifelong friend. He's in San Diego now. He's still doing sports casting. But there were lots of years where we would send each other the blooper reel from your specific TV station. And stations now don't do that as much, but it used to be like, oh, did you see what Billy did? We're going to put that on a special tape and save it for the rest of the year. And at the end of the year Christmas party or whatever, we're going to show all these flubs and bloopers and what have you. I've got a few that I've certainly made in my career. What rating is this podcast, by the way?
Don't worry about
check
it.
that out before I told you exactly what I said on TV and was embarrassed about.
Go with it.
All right, so I'll give you the cleaner of the two. One happened in Columbus, which I don't want to repeat in any recorded session ever. But one happened early in my career. I was a weekend sportscaster in Santa Barbara, California. And the way the format usually works is they've got a couple of news blocks. You do the weather. At the end of the weather, they say, hey, when we come back, we're going to take a commercial. When we come back, Kent's going to be here with sports. And then you take a commercial, and then sports happens, and then a commercial, and then the kicker story, and a final look at weather, and then, your newscast is done. So on this particular day, the top story for local sports was in Santa Barbara. The local country club had their tennis championship, and it was an amateur, sort of thing, and who won. And so coming out of the commercial, the news anchor, who was a great friend, he loves sports also. But Scott turns to Kent and says, hey, Kent's been following tennis today. Boy, great day for tennis. Yeah, great day. Yeah, great competition. And the happy chat is just going on just a little bit too long. You just feel, okay, that's enough. We don't need to chat about this. Kent needs to start doing a sportscast. So as I start turning from the shot where I'm looking at my co-anchor, and I turn to the camera and address it head, straight on, that's called the one shot. So as I'm turning from the two shot to the one shot, my co-anchor says, oh, come on, Kent. It was amateur tennis. Why didn't we see you playing in the tournament today? And so as I make that turn, my mouth keeps speaking as my brain screams, no. And I look at the camera and I say, oh, no, Scott. Nobody wants to see me out there slamming my balls into the net. And it's like the words are coming out. I'm like, I got to be able to put them back in, and I couldn't. And so my news anchor, my co-anchor, turns his back to me so I don't see him laughing.
Yeah.
The floor director is on the floor in between the cameras laughing. And through his headset, I can hear the control room laughing as I try to just bear down, grit my teeth and say, and in the championship round today of tennis. And, you just tried to get through it. But
Sure.
yeah, that was not what I planned on saying.
I couldn't get
I'm
through
glad you did.
I couldn't get through your bio at the top of this episode, so I'm just so impressed that you do what you do on camera every
Well,
night with tens and billions of people watching.
Billions.
Yeah.
And billions. So, and Kendall, you and I can probably relate to this, but that music thing, I go back to, playing trumpet in college helped pay my way. But being a musician really paved the way for me to be, I think, an effective communicator and succeed as much as I have even in my TV career. Because when you're in 6th grade or 8th grade or 10th grade and you're playing in that concert, You're playing the pit orchestra for the musical that the school is doing. When you're doing the field show, in the middle of the halftime for the football game, because you're learning ways to communicate. And music is that expression. It's a different way to convey feelings and all of that. I absolutely believe that is a big reason that I'm comfortable in front of a camera, or comfortable in front of a crowd, or feel really confident, I guess, about expressing myself. What do you think about that, Kendall?
That's interesting. I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think for a lot of folks, myself included, with music, is music actually sometimes in the past has given me a way to communicate emotion in ways that I otherwise wouldn't have felt comfortable. But for some odd reason, put a group of people in front of me and put a guitar in my hand, and I'm an open book, and I'm happy to be that way. Take the guitar away and make it one or two people instead of more. It gets far more intimidating.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So that's in my
Blooper
book.
Story, by the way. That's in your book, yeah.
That's in my book called Introverts Make the Best Public Speakers.
And there's a chapter about mashed potatoes in there. Is that right?
Indeed. You heard about that, huh?
Yeah. I figured that was one of the questions coming. Well, Kent, if you're on In the Middle, tell me what your favorite mashed potato is.
Go for it.
No, I don't have a favorite one. I hate
you, what?
Just kidding.
No.
Just kidding.
Okay. Whew.
Matter of fact, you'll be happy to know that on Sunday I had the twice baked potato.
There you go. That's like mashed potatoes and baked potatoes combined right there.
That's right.
But no, I feel like for you too, you have the name Kent Justice.
Does it sound like a stage name? Does it
Obviously,
sound made up?
It kind of does, or it at least sounds like, man, your path was set before you, man.
Yeah. So either broadcaster or like lawyer, right? I mean,
exactly, or both. So in my mind, so this is maybe a really weird avenue to go right now. When I hear the name Kent Justice and someone tells me that somebody named Kent Justice is involved in local news, the person that I think of is there's probably a terminology for this person in the industry. I don't know, but I call him the leather jacket guy. Do you know who I'm talking about? Like a lot of times local news stations will have the leather jacket guy who's like the bad boy who's going after the bad landlord, and you know who I'm talking about? You know what I'm saying?
I think I do now.
That's what I think is, like, you have like the one special camera angle that's reserved for this guy that's from like overhead, and
he's the one trying to catch like crooked car dealers, and he'll do the hidden camera to try to catch them in the thing. That guy.
So Kendall, when I was at Channel 6 there in Columbus, I was the On Your Side reporter.
Okay.
We actually had sent out a mailer to people in, like, I don't know, this is like 2009 or something like that, and had a picture of me, arms crossed, suit on, holding the microphone, and it said, "Get justice on your side."
There it is. Yeah.
There you go.
But they didn't have the leather jacket for you yet, or was that?
You know what? We did not discuss the leather jacket.
Okay.
I haven't worn a leather jacket on TV before because it gets so cold here in Florida. Right.
Right. I've heard it gets down to low 70s sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. Better get a light windbreaker for that. Yeah.
I feel like I watched just enough Simpsons in seeing Kent Brockman on the news on The Simpsons that you couldn't have been anything else the first time I met Kent Justice, because it felt just like Kent Brockman.
When I started here in Jacksonville a few years ago, I was doing weekend evenings. The weekend morning news anchor, no lie, his name was Jason Law. Law and justice on the weekends.
Yeah.
Go to it. Go promo team.
There you go.
All right. So I'm going to play the role of Clark Griswold, the buffoon, handing you a big jumbled mess of Christmas lights. and I'll let you unpack it however you want. But I did have a question for you, and you were
I'm only going to accept that if you sing Holiday Road many times.
How many times?
Oh, the Christmas.
You did it so beautifully, I couldn't upstage you. So you were alluding earlier with the Bob Smith example to a lot of things I think people need to hear, which is how much vetting and filtering happens, behind the scenes before a story comes to light and before you do what you do. So the question is, even today, with so much fake news or actual fake news, with corporate mass media and all these things, why is journalism, I think we already know this, but I want to hear your perspective. Why is journalism still so important? And speak to the nature of why we need what you do and why it's so important and why it's not just the internet link you go click and read an article. I mean, just unpack that however you want. Like I said, it was going to be a messy ball of Christmas lights, but I want you to do with that what you want.
I'm in untangling them in my mind right now.
Yeah, that's fine, and I can vamp a little longer while you play Rusty. But
no. So I'll, and please feel free to interact. I don't mean to be too wordy on this, but as I've spoken to groups over the last few years, the last 4.5 years specifically, the question very frequently has been, what do you do about fake news? Or why should I believe your news when so much of what I see is fake? And what really people mean is slanted, agenda driven. At least that's how it appears to them. And guess what? Producer or newsroom manager or whatever, if that's what people feel when they watch your product, then that's what it is, at least to them. I had a couple of opportunities 4 years ago when President Trump was still the candidate. He was running for office, so he hadn't been elected yet. But one of those occasions was here in St. Augustine, where I live. He had come to do a rally, had an opportunity to interview him just one-on-one. Cameraman and me and some of his people there, but the man who would soon become president. And the thing flying around that week in the national news was that President Trump was saying crooked media. They're the problem. And so standing in front of Donald J. Trump, I'm not particularly a guy who loves some controversy or confrontation. I'm not the guy who's the gotcha. Hey, you didn't see that one coming and I tripped you up. That's not who I am as a reporter. But it was pretty apparent, Ken, you should get him to weigh in on this. And so I asked him, Mr. Trump, you've said that the media is the problem here. I'm a member of the local media. How am I your problem? And it was a very brief conversation on that because he essentially deflected. He said, well, maybe not you, but everybody else, is the problem. So over these last few years, hearing that question, why do we have so much fake news? I mean, sometimes that's the way it's presented. I know that on the local level, and I certainly can agree with people who say, hey, I see that on the cable news networks. I see an agenda. I see that this network is in that political corner, or it seems like it. And this network always seems to say things that seem to support that political party. For us on the local news level, wow, what an opportunity to help people understand the value of journalism. So we try and go out of our way, I certainly do, not to just tell you a news story, but to even tell you how I gathered the news. Here's the story about Bob Smith again, right? Bob Smith was arrested today, even though he's running to be mayor of the town. He was accused of fraud and embezzlement and these sorts of things. Where did we get that? Well, so that's what the police say. Why do the police say that? Well, the police have been working in concert with the FBI. The FBI won't tell us what the evidence is, but what we've talked about with the prosecutor over here is they said there's this, and this episode that we think is tied back there. Okay, now let's talk to Bob Smith's attorney or Bob Smith himself. Bob Smith, what do you say about this? Because you should have a chance to explain what's going on here as well. And by the way, some of you are thinking, hey, is this all politically driven because he was running for office? Let's talk to the political parties in Jacksonville or in Duval County for context. That way you're showing, hey, it's not just we heard one thing, we ran with it, and we told you only that little slice of it. The tough part is newspapers used to do a great job of that. Many newspapers still do a great job of that. Many newspapers have a lot of words that they can put out, not just on an actual newspaper, which gets tossed in a driveway because that doesn't happen much anymore. But they've got as much copy as they want to write and however far in depth they want to go on their webpage, right? Digital media. It's tougher on the TV news side because typically what they say is, okay, reporter, you've got a minute and a half to tell your story. All right, so now I got to do a lot of condensing. I don't want to miss some of those really important things. And I'm grateful. I think other stations are doing it as well. The newsrooms are doing it as well. But I'm grateful our management says, hey, it's important to make sure that we get the story right. So if we have to take 2 minutes instead of 90 seconds, hey, if it's really complex and we've got a lot of sides to cover, then let's have 2 reporters do it. So this reporter will take one side of the argument and this reporter will take that other element so that we can get all the elements in there and give you a more complete picture. Why is it important? Dylan asks. That's a great question. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world. If we talk about globally or nationally, hey, let's just bring it down to your community. There's stuff going on there where people have been put in power. They've been appointed, they've been elected, they've risen to the top, and journalism serves a role of holding power accountable. It's an important one. It's tough to do. It's part of the reason the current president has said, hey, they're the problem. Well, people in power often don't like to be held accountable. Even the folks who haven't done anything wrong or feel like they haven't done anything wrong have to answer to, hey, this is the concern and we're asking about it. So what's your answer? You look at countries that don't have a free press, you look at the countries that don't have a First Amendment right. And that's where there's oppression. That's where there's not fairness. It's not a perfect system that we have here in the United States of America in a lot of different ways, but that free press part is a pretty important component to it. There's a lot of different ways to get to the truth, but getting to the truth is pretty important. In Jacksonville in the last year, there's been a little bit of a scandal with our utility, our power and water and sewage. It's owned by the city, this energy authority. And that means the stakeholders really are the customers. The customers who pay for the service also own the service provider. And so when suddenly a year ago, the newly installed chief executive said, hey, things are really bad. We should look at maybe selling this. And then when that was approved and kind of in the fine print of that board meeting, there was a plan for a bonus package for executives that we found out months later was tied to if the selling price was really high, they would get millions and millions of dollars. How was that going to come out unless there were reporters, there were journalists who were digging into that and saying something doesn't seem right? Let's find out if it is right or if it isn't. And if it doesn't seem right, let's keep asking those questions so that we know what the truth is. That's an ongoing process. That's turned into, in our community, that's turned into some investigations from our city council, now from the federal authorities as well. Is there criminal wrongdoing? We still don't know. It took local journalism to push on that in order to find out. And since then, we've heard it described as the single biggest attempt to defraud the people of Jacksonville in the city's history. Pretty important to have that kind of stuff come out. And that's the power of a free press, and that's the importance of local journalism. That was really long-winded, huh?
That was great. Well, there was a video as we were talking about bringing you on. Maybe it's something we'll share on our kind of side page. There's a video that kind of prompted that question where regardless of your view, not your, but everyone, the listener's view of George W. Bush, he appears on the Ellen show and she asks him about his take on, after post-presidency, his take on Putin and the press. You can Google it on YouTube. But I think he shares some very, very similar thoughts. And this was before Trump, probably pretty easily the most criticized president by a lot of people. And he goes on to say a lot of what you said. It's incredibly important, in spite of the criticism. Nobody likes it, but in spite of it, it's incredibly important to have a free press. And he would encourage leaders of other countries to allow that kind of system as well, because of how important it was. Well, and so regardless of whether you like him or not is not important, but what he's saying, I think, is critical and lines up exactly with what you're saying.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's important to ask those questions, even if you don't want to, as a journalist. In a lot of situations, on a lot of occasions, you have to ask the hard questions to people that you might like, you might have a good relationship with. Guess what? It's your job. Ask the hard question. And from my perspective, you don't have to be a jerk about it.
Yeah.
I talked earlier about I'm not the gotcha guy.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason that I can have those people in power sit down in a studio with me for a half-hour television show, because I'll say, hey, this is the big deal, and I'm going to have to ask about this thing. Just be prepared. I'm going to ask about that thing. And when we get there, they're not surprised that I asked about that thing.
Yeah.
They're also not surprised when I say, yeah, that answer wasn't very good. Let's talk more about that. That's no fun for anybody, but it's really important to get to the truth.
Yeah, and if there's anything more to add there, I think it's interesting, that nuance of that moment, because I think there's a lot of citizens that feel like journalists and reporters and things sort of pull their punches on the tough questions on people sometimes, and they don't quite just stick them with the direct question. They sort of beat around the bush.
That's interesting.
Is there more to that situation when you're sitting in it? That the average citizen, it's easy from your armchair to say, well, just ask him about this, in an interview.
It's a tough thing, because by training and by temperament, by our personalities, we're more inclined to be the person who pokes, or the person who says, I got to ask, but I don't really want to. And as a professional, you got to figure out how to be effective. So that's interesting. We get criticized on both sides of that. We've got a great City Hall reporter who's been reporting in our town for 30 years, and nobody likes to see him coming at City Hall, because they're like, oh boy, he's going to ask me the most pointed questions. I got to, put that away and get out of here. So he'll get criticized for, how dare you ask that sharp-tongued question? Oh, it's an important question. Sorry. Yeah. And we can get criticized, appropriately so, when we don't ask the hard question or push far enough to try and get the real answer. I've had a great time over these last 10 years getting to moderate some debates. Corey, you talked about that earlier. It's a lot of fun, but it's really taught me to embrace being a good listener. That's really important in being a good interviewer. You got to listen really well, because if my first question, okay, that's an answer. So I'll move to my second question. Okay, should I go to my third? Well, wait a second. Did they answer question number 2? Maybe I need to ask another question about topic number 2. I had mayoral candidates a few years ago that we debated. And after the debate, the election happened a few weeks later. The incumbent didn't win. I saw that incumbent a couple weeks later and just, hey, great to see you, and come on my show. He had broken some territory. He was our first Black mayor in Jacksonville. And I said, hey, please come on my show, and I'd like to talk about what you accomplished, what you didn't get to accomplish, what's next for you. And when I saw him, he said, hey, good to see you. I didn't like that question. I said, beg your pardon? I want to talk to you about something. I said, I can tell. I didn't like that question. When we got down to it, it was a matter of the other candidate asked a specific question, and then the sitting mayor didn't really answer it. And so as the moderator, what am I supposed to do? Move on? No, I had to say, hey, by the way, that's what the question was. What's the answer? Didn't answer it again. And so I had to come back kind of a third time and say, what's the answer to the question? And it wasn't a yes or no question, but it was pretty cut and dry. And that's not that. I'm not getting an answer. I have to push a little farther. So.
But I love what you articulated earlier, that all of that is really an effort to paint the fuller picture. And as tough as it may be, if that's what you feel like your job is, to do the job of the free press honestly and with integrity, then that means painting a fuller picture. And they have an opportunity to answer that however they wish. Sometimes the pointed question is exactly what they need to make their point, state their case. It's not, they should look at it as an opportunity or a platform and not an arrow, right?
Right. Yeah, an attack, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Interesting. So to kind of round out some of those questions, there's still a lot of, I think there's still a lot of people struggling to find the truth in everything that's swirling around on social media and the 24-hour news networks and things like that have a lot of time to fill. And so what do you tell people outside of a great local news station like yours and stations that are clearly doing their due diligence and following the right process for filtering news? What do you tell somebody who just says, I just don't know where to find the truth? You know, I in all of what's going on, whether it's a local issue or a national issue or an international issue, what's your best answer for those people? Like, I just don't know what news to trust, or I don't know where to go.
Yeah. It's a tough question. And I don't have a great answer for it. I don't know that anybody has a great answer for it. It's grandstanding to say, well, you should look at our website at news4jax.com. I mean,
yeah,
it's a tough question to answer. And to even jump on, to piggyback on that, in October last year, our newsroom had a meeting where our news director said, hey, everybody, not just the reporters or the anchors or the editors or the producers, everybody who's going to be involved in the news production process, news gathering and production process, we're getting together. And the whole purpose of that meeting was to say, we're between now, October 2019, and a year from now, November 2020, we're going to be covering politics. It's a big national election. There will be local candidates, local issues, but locally, we'll do the local news on that national campaign for president. And here's how we're going to do it. And I was so impressed because our bosses said, we're going to tell both sides and we're going to be balanced and we're going to go the extra mile to explain how we are covering the news and how we're gathering the news. And they brought in a man who's our main news anchor. He's worked with our station for 43 years. He's still on air with us. He does the 5 and 6 o'clock news. Tom Wills is his name. And so that experience, hey, his word carries some weight. And the news director introduced him as, hey, Tom has been doing this for a long time. Tom, and I asked almost that question, where do you go to get the real news, the truth? And he said, if you're looking for one website to go to find right down the middle, you're not going to find it. So I look at this one, which I know is slanted to the right, and I look at this one, which I know is slanted to the left, and I try to compare sources and kind of figure out what's in the middle there. It's difficult. And yet it's pretty important because I think a lot of people right now, the reason that the cable news networks are leaning one direction or the other is because that's what viewers want. There are lots of viewers who say, just tell me what I want to hear. Just tell me what I want to hear. So if you're speaking my language, good, I'm going to watch you.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act. It really is. It's pretty tough.
Yeah, and people don't want to admit that that's what they're going there for either. So then you have to, if you're genuinely trying to discuss something, then you have to almost get them to admit, you know, I think if the news ticks you off half the time and you love it half the time, you might have found a pretty good news source.
Well, I think, and along those lines, I think I'm probably doing my job pretty well as the political reporter. If I get criticized for being too conservative on how I covered that candidate, and at the same time, I get a message that's saying you're too liberal on how you covered that candidate, that topic. And I get those, over the years, the email is to me and my bosses, like the chief executive of our entire company, that Kent Justice, he said this, and that means he clearly believes that.
Someone should really start a podcast on trying to maintain a centrist point of view.
There's some weight to that. Corey, we talked a few days ago about this, but most of America, when it comes to the politics of things, are in the middle. Most of America really is in the middle, but what gets covered is the fringes. What gets covered is the extremes.
Yeah.
And it's fairly frustrating for, I think, a lot of people who say, I don't want the extremes. I want something that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And it's probably in the middle.
You even recommended a potential guest that we could have on the show who wrote a book on just that thing. So I think you're going to put us in touch with him maybe later. I'm conscious of time. I could talk with you for another hour, but I don't know how much time you have left. Do you have time for just a few rapid questions from our loyal listeners?
Let's keep talking.
Okay.
So let's start with this. Meteorologists.
Right half the time.
Right half the time. Are the weatherman or the weatherwoman, are they always actually meteorologists? Sometimes are they a face?
So you said always,
which I should not say, right?
They're not always meteorologists. Most of the folks that I've worked with in newsrooms, they are. I mean, they take it seriously. They get their training. I know one of my colleagues in Jacksonville a few years ago, when he got to us, he had taken some courses, but he didn't have a seal from the American Meteorological Society or what have you. But he was working on that and getting that master's degree and whatever. They take it pretty seriously. There are some out there, especially on the national level, who their personalities more than the scientists who say, "Ooh, what could that cloud mean today?"
Good one.
All right, here's one. If you had to have any other career at this point, you could just seamlessly transition. What would it be?
Do I have to be talented enough to pull it off?
No, you can. You just get to do it if you decide you want to.
I just get to do it if I want to?
Yeah, sure.
I haven't given any thought to this. I've got so many careers going on right now. I'll choose another one.
This is a Twitter question. None of this is real.
Twitter's not real? What?
Barely.
Head football coach at Ohio State University.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I said that wrong. At the Ohio State.
There it is. Now you've got the job.
Yeah, now you've got the proper amount of arrogance in there now.
President of Pepperdine University, because that thing is on the hillside in Malibu. You look over the ocean. It's spectacular. I'd be back in California, which I love. I don't want to live there anymore. No disrespect to people who live in California and listen to the podcast. But it's expensive. There are all sorts of things there. It's beautiful, great place to visit. But maybe one of those two jobs. Thank you, Dylan.
Okay, sure.
Quarantine, COVID-19. Did you experience anything different? Yeah, you hate it. Did you have any work from home days, or are you working from home, or are you home more often than you were?
No, I am home more often than I was, and more so on the financial planning side, because I can do that from home. I can have meetings with clients like, we're meeting now. But it's interesting. You had to figure some different things out there. I wasn't going out, and I'm still not going out into the field with a photographer as often. And part of that is safety. Hey, let's limit how many times we're sending our news people out to potentially be exposed to COVID. We did have about half of our on-air staff who worked from home. We've transitioned back to having most of our people in the TV station now. But I'm not sitting next to my co-anchor at the anchor desk anymore. I'm in one studio, they're in the other. Mm-hmm. And you kind of we've had to figure out some of those things, because it's harder to do that.
Yeah.
The weather person at home, the co-anchor in another room, and you're here. Well, you have to plan out all the details. Who's going to speak first when we say, hey, what's the weather going to be tomorrow morning? The first couple of days we were stomping all over each other and it was hard to understand. Or the weather person didn't know we were going to talk. And so we started to talk and they started to talk and then nobody can understand and say what, and it was terrible. But we've gotten better at that. I think over the time we've been in coronavirus land.
You've interviewed some pretty well-known people, some pretty powerful people. We've talked on this podcast about those celebrities or people that if we saw them in an airport or a coffee shop, we would freak out. When you did that and when you were in the interviewer's chair, did you, for the most part, and you don't have to get into specifics, get the impression like, yeah, they're human beings just like we are. They put their pants on the same way. Or are there certain people that like elevate the level of the air in the room and like, whoa, they have a presence?
So I'll tell you this. It's been a lot of fun, and it's certainly one of the benefits, the joys of the job is you never know. Today I walk into work and what? I get to interview that person today, or do that story, or travel to that place. That's been pretty cool. I will tell you, when I worked at Channel 4 there in Columbus, one day there was a lot of attention because a guest from the morning show had come out after the interview and everybody in the newsroom kind of came over. Oh, can we take a picture with you? Well, it was Senator John Glenn, astronaut John Glenn, not the celebrity on the TV show, not the singer that you bought the CD of, a real life hero. Anyway, that was pretty cool. And that was maybe the time that I went, oh my goodness, I'm in the presence of, somebody who's amazing. There have been some other times like that, but by and large, you meet folks and you get to shake a hand with them or wave at them in COVID land, I guess. But you get around some folks that normally you'd think would be very intimidating. And so many of them are so friendly, genuine, nice, relatable that you go, wow, they're just, like you said, they put their pants on one leg at a time, and they're just a regular person doing great stuff. So,
all right. So I've got a loaded question here. So, do you feel any pressure to stay skinny and look young?
As a TV news anchor,
yes,
there is a little pressure. Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Your appearance is part of the thing. I have had I've had bosses say, hey, there's that, you're kind of getting a wrinkle in the middle of your forehead. Maybe you want to detox. And then I say, yeah, I never would have thought of that on my own. Thanks. But I guess I have to go, figure that out or whatever. At the same time, middle age is a time when your middle area starts expanding a little bit, whether you want it to or not. And yeah, I get sensitive to, I don't want that too much longer anyway. Yeah, but I'll tell you, even this year, 2020, again, back to that stinking 2020. I didn't fully do a 19 pounds in the COVID-19. All that, that stress and sitting around and changes and everything, it certainly added to the scale. So yeah, there is some pressure on that. There really is. Thanks.
Only really in the last.
I feel like
contract.
I feel like you guys are you're really concerned about me. Kent, do you feel pressure on that? I'm glad you asked that.
Sure. How much time do you think? How much time do you think you've got left? Sorry.
In the podcast,
as an anchor or in life?
Yeah. Another question like that, I'll have about 2 seconds. But go for it.
All right, I've got another quick one. How much do you end up ad-libbing?
So when there's breaking news, that's where I turn my sportscaster experience on, doing play-by-play of what you can see in the scene or the little tidbits that you've already captured and trying to give that information. So breaking news is really where you do ad-libbing. there's some ad-libbing that will happen in crosstalk. Hey, now we want to talk with the weather person, and so we'll just chit-chat. Hey, by the way, I forgot to tell you, Mr. Weather Guy, I saw an amazing sunrise today. You know, that there are opportunities for ad-lib. But in an actual news story, you really don't too much, because it's hopefully already gone through that process we talked about earlier about, hey, I made sure that the right comments are in, or the right content is there, versus just winging it and then maybe saying, shoot, now I made it slanted somehow.
Okay, so this podcast and many of our listeners are into the geek culture thing, including science fiction, film, Star Wars, comic books. It is my understanding that you have a comic-related story.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, the first time I listened to your podcast, about a year ago, I guess, right? You guys have been going for a year now. Is that right?
Yeah.
We were driving from Florida to Cleveland, Ohio to see family up there. And either going there or coming back, my son, who's turning 20 this week, he said, hey, did you know? And he points out on whatever the platform was, Spotify or something like that, Corey and Dylan Hubble and this other guy are doing this podcast, and it's about it. And it was, you got to hear this, Dad. They're talking about the last Avengers movie, the last Star Wars movie. And so I'm like, yeah. And so we listened to several of your episodes in succession on this 14-hour drive between Florida and Ohio. So as a youngster, yeah, I was drawing all the time. I was about 12. This is 1980. About 12, there was a comic book convention, which nobody in my family had heard of before. It's called Fringe Con, and it was in Phoenix, Arizona. Well, my grandparents lived about an hour south of there in a place called Arizona City. And so I was spending summer with grandma and grandpa for 6 weeks or something, and begged and pleaded and please, can I go to this? And my grandfather was not going to take a 12-year-old up to the big city and drop him off at the convention center and pick him up 12 hours later or whatever. So my grandfather, who had no interest whatsoever, bought a ticket to this convention and went with me. But I saw that there was an art contest for Fringe Con. And so I drew with colored pencils and everything, 4 different comic book characters, all Marvel comic book characters, by the way. And I submitted it for this art contest. I had no idea what I was doing. When you submitted it, they said, okay, put a price on it. I'm like, 50 cents, you know. These 4 submissions, 2 of them were purchased. And when I went to collect my artwork, they gave me these 2 pieces that weren't purchased. And they gave me a check for $2 because these 2 pictures had been purchased, and a short note from the person who purchased them, Stan Lee.
What?
And it said, hey, man, send me your portfolio. I'd love to see more. And it didn't say Excelsior, unfortunately, or enough said or anything like that. But Stan Lee bought my stuff. And it was great. And I had no idea what a portfolio was. And even, you know, for a couple more years, I'm thinking, I want to be a comic book artist. And then sports took over or something like that. But I am pained to say, I do not know where that little note was that I got from Stan Lee saying, hey, man, send me your portfolio. But that was a pretty cool thing, especially. That would be any age artist hearing from Stan Lee, I want to see more of your work because I like the...
Yeah, one of our previous guests tried for a really long time to get in at Marvel, and you're like a kid and getting...
No kidding. How about
That's
that?
amazing.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah, I was a huge comic book fan. My kids have kind of taken up the mantle of all the comics that I still have, trying to catalog, price guides, sell some, keep some, that kind of thing. But we have been all in on like every single one of the Marvel movies that's come out. Thank goodness for Disney Plus, because I watch them frequently even now. Last night was Ant-Man yet again. So coming soon is like Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So
That's cool.
it's on my list all the time.
Well, Ken, I know we've gone a little long, and I'm really grateful for your time. But I wanted to hit on another topic before we wrap. And you and I had a little prep call to sort of talk about what maybe the plan was for this episode, and just kind of get up to speed on some maybe topic ideas. And as we were having that prep call, I kind of shared with you sort of what our dream was early on when we started this thing, was to bring back the lost art of conversation and civil discourse. And while we have no delusions of grandeur, our hope is that we will continue to have on guests of different backgrounds and colors and creeds. And you shared a story with me of a sort of a forum that you've created. And if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear about that. You know, we've talked about it a couple times. 2020 so far has pretty much sucked in a lot of ways. And
You said pretty much.
and you know, we would, you know, while we try to offer a little bit of a departure from all of the things that are serious, we also don't want to ignore them. And your job is to bring the news and to paint a full picture. And so I would love for you to just share what you shared with me about these discussions that you've been having as these racial tensions are going on in our country. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you've started, and one that I hope others could emulate, and something you don't know, which will be a surprise when you're done. You inspired me, and I took action on that, and something pretty cool happened literally less than an hour or two after we got off the phone.
How about that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what that is. Basically, when George Floyd was killed several weeks ago, and through that week, we started seeing the demonstrations or protests, and it was becoming a bigger thing. We were talking about that on the news more than we were talking about COVID-19 suddenly. And as things shifted there, I reached out to one of my friends who is retired 32 years in the U.S. Navy. He's Black. He's maybe my best friend here in Jacksonville. And I reached out to him just to shoot the breeze on a Friday morning after that had happened in Minneapolis on that Monday. And he's just shot me a text that said, you know what? I really appreciate reaching out. I'm not in the mood to really talk about anything right now. I'm having a hard day. And so I followed up that night, and he told me about, Kent, I don't even know what to say. This man served at the highest levels, protecting our country. And whether we were just shooting the breeze or having a serious discussion, never heard him like he was that night, talking with uncertainty in his voice. And it was, Kent, my children are grown, but I still, today, I don't know how to answer the question for them when they say, why am I treated differently because of what I look like? And that particular night was when things had turned violent in Atlanta. And he's saying, my adult children live in Atlanta. What am I supposed to say to them tonight? I can't protect them tonight. I spent 32 years protecting our country. I can't protect them. And it was an intense conversation, moving conversation. I realized, wow, this is really, it's a big impact for this one friend. Guess what, Kent? That might be impacting a lot of your friends who are people of color. So I kind of put to mind, you know what, I want to reach out. I don't want to be the guy who would reach out to my friend who just so happens to be Black and talk about who's going to win the Super Bowl next week, or, hey, what do you think about the NBA finals? But when something important like this happens, I'm nowhere to be found. I didn't want to be that guy. And I didn't have an answer to myself. What am I even supposed to say? But I just took it right there. And so I called my friend back and I said, hey, I'm just checking, it was a couple days later, I'm just checking back in with you because you know what? If I didn't say it the other day, I don't really know what to say. But I want you to know I'm here and you mean a lot to me and you are my friend and I need to understand more about this. And I started making some of those other phone calls to other friends I have who are Black. And some of them responded like, it means a lot to me just that you reached out. And some of them were ready to have the conversation right there. Let's dive in. Let's go right now. I want to tell you all about my experience and why I'm frustrated or why I'm hurt, why I live in fear, those sorts of things. And one of the things I'd enjoyed last year, late in the fall, was just with some of this great Florida weather we have when it's not 95 degrees during the summers. Hey, we can have a nice 80-degree day. And in the evening, it's 75 and it's wonderful. I just had some time inviting some guys over to socialize. I said, you know what, let me put that hat back on and invite some people over, but be more intentional about it. And so I made sure that it was a diverse group, and I lured them in with the promise of, hey, let's come have some adult beverages. Matter of fact, what I told them, Corey, was come have some bourbon, smoke a cigar, and solve the problems of the world. And the first two things, they're optional. The last one, mandatory.
Yeah, I love it.
It was interesting the kind of response I got. Lots of people said, I'm there. What you just tell me what time and where, and I'm there. And the conversations that happened, matter of fact, the first one that we had was 3 weeks ago, and there were 10 or 11 of us there. And I just said, hey, I'm not here to preach to anybody, but it did catch my eye this week that 1 Peter 4, 7 and 8 say that the end of the world is near and we need to be persistent in prayer. And then the next verse says, but most importantly, we need to love each other. And so I used that and I just said, so guys, this is what this is about. We're together because there's this strife going on. There's this stuff that a lot of us don't understand. I'm here to try and understand. I'm here to try and say, how can we love each other? Go. And I mean, it was kind of that broadly put, just to say, let's just talk about this. And people shared stories and people shared perspectives, including a friend who had driven from the north side of Jacksonville, that's 35 miles, got within 10 minutes of my house and said, I realized I didn't have my wallet. I had to go home right away and get my wallet, because what if I was pulled over by a police officer? And he said, he was explaining to the rest of us, that's part of what, as a Black man, I think when I see a police cruiser, I go through a checklist. Where am I at? Am I okay? What do I need to do so that this is going to be okay for me, that I'm going to go back to my wife tonight, that I'm going to be there for my kids? And it was a jarring example because it happened right that day, just before he got there. And the person sitting next to me said, I would never have thought I had to turn around and go home. I would have thought, hey, if I'm pulled over, I could explain it to the officer and everything would be fine. So right there, we started having okay, it's a different experience for you than it is for me based on the color of our skin. And what came out of that, we talked for an hour and a half or so on that specific issue. It was kind of intense. But what came out of that were some people saying, hey, I'd like to have your phone number. Hey, I'd like to talk more about this. And at the end of the day, that man who had I have to turn around and go home and get my wallet, he told me, I guess it was the next day, I told him how grateful I was that he came anyway. Some people would have said, oh, I got to go home and I'm not driving another 75 miles, round trip to do this. We talked about the fact that the conversations are good. Part of the component of healing against the racial divide that we've got here, the racial bias there, is relationship. And so what we were doing, even for the 10 or 11 of us who got together, we were building some relationship. And I went, wow, this is powerful. I'm going to do this again next week. And so I invited 9 different men over. Hey, same kind of thing. Come over, and our agenda is, let's talk about this. And that was powerful too. I had a neighbor who said, boy, I had not really thought about things in the context of what some of the men there shared. I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight because I'm checking myself. How do I contribute, or how do I take away from what should be happening in our country? Powerful. I'm going to keep doing it. I've got a couple more of these meetings planned, and as the virus will let us, we're going to keep trying to have those conversations and speak at a level that says, let's not be defensive about it. Let's actually share. So you got to, to have the conversation, you got to be a great listener. let me listen. Let me have the purpose of this conversation be that I want to learn, not I want to persuade you. It's powerful.
So you and I had that conversation on a Sunday morning, and it's Sunday. There would be no reason that I'm on my office computer other than to have a quick Zoom call with you. And as I'm hanging up on Zoom with you, some would call this coincidence. I believe in something different. One of my Columbus College of Art and Design friends, it said, is participating in a live stream. Because you know how it informs you when one of your Facebook friends is watching anything? And it happened to be a live stream from Bethany Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, which is a Black church in Cleveland. And they were having a conversation on what is the role of Black Christians in America right now, and how do we help heal our nation? And so my CCAD friend is a deacon in that church, and I just hopped on the call and I just came to listen. And I started to type a question into the live stream, and then I'm like, oh, this is not my forum. This is not my place. And I'm like, no, well, I'm here. I'm going to ask. And that question was, how can your white evangelical brothers and sisters stand with you during this time? What would you ask of us?
Yeah.
And they didn't answer any questions on the live stream except for mine. And they said, thank you for the question, Corey Hubel. But they just dove into it, man. And they said kind of the same thing you're saying, which is a relational bridge needs to be built first so that we can actually have a conversation. And they said, shame on us for not coming into your churches, and shame on you for not coming into ours, because currently we're living siloed existences trying to solve this problem. And so it was just cool that after hearing you tell your story, and I told you I want to be a part of these conversations, that I was given the opportunity by chance or whatever else to just lean into a similar conversation of my own. So I would challenge all of us to, on some level, do what you're doing and just say, hey, because on this Zoom call right now, we're 4 white dudes, but we can ask questions and we can listen. And so anyway, I just thought that was cool and a thoughtful way to round out our time with you. I just so appreciate our friendship. I appreciate that you tried to do your job with honesty and integrity, that you do what you do with groups in the community outside of this forum that you've just started, and that you facilitate those conversations as well. You're just a solid dude. For you to give us an hour and a half of your time on vacation to chat is very, very gracious. And
it's been an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It felt like 5 minutes, man.
Anything else you want to say, Kent, before we close it out?
Well, just on that note of relationship, Corey, you and I have one of those friendships that will go forever. Dylan, it's been way too long since I got to see you. And you know what, Kendall? We should get together because we're going to have a lot in common. So you come to Florida and sweat it out, baby. Sweat it out.
All right. Thanks for your time, man. Do you want to close us out?
Oh, do we close out with the big title page too?
No, I didn't send you anything. You just got
in the middle. Do you want me to do the announcer voice?
Yeah. Just close us out with something. Ad lib it.
Oh, I do have to ad lib. Holy cow. I'm stumped. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to In the Middle.
It's from. Say from.
Oh, you've been listening to From the Middle.
Awesome.
You can't give a guy like me. Dang it. Boy, epic fail by Kent Justin.
No, all good. We'll add it to your blooper reel. Thanks, my man. Appreciate you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Talk later.